I'd like to welcome everyone to our electronic meeting on June the 30th, 2021. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, Regional Council is practicing physical distancing, and I am present in the council chambers. All other members are participating electronically. The purpose of this meeting is to provide contextual information and seek direction from Council to support the development of the Region of Waterloo's 2022 annual budget, business plan and budget. I would like to acknowledge the land on which we gather virtually today is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Neutral people. We acknowledge the enduring presence of the Indigenous people with whom we share this land today, their achievements, and their contributions to our community. I would now ask Stevie Nanalachny to do the roll call.
Councillor Armstrong?
Present.
Councillor Erb? I believe he has sent his... He's here. Excellent. Councillor Foxton?
Present.
Councillor Galloway?
Present.
Councillor Harris?
I'm here.
Councillor Jaworski?
Here.
I'll go back to Councillor Clark. I can see Councillor Clark.
He
Councillor...
said in the chat room, I'm here as well, but
Right.
Councillor Clark said in the chat room that she's having trouble with sound.
All right. Councillor Jowett?
I'm here.
Councillor Kiefer? I can see
Here.
Councillor Kiefer. Councillor Lawrence has sent his regrets. Councillor McGarry?
Present.
Councillor Nowak?
Present.
Councillor Shantz?
Present.
Councillor Strickland?
Here.
Councillor Verbenovich?
Present.
And Regional Chair Redmond.
Present.
We have everyone present with the exception of Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Stevie. I would now entertain a motion to reconvene in open session. This is moved by Councillor Urbanovich, seconded by Councillor Foxton. Please use your icons to vote yes or no. That is carried. Thank you. And Councillor Kiefer, I did see your hand up, so that's great. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? Councillor Jowett.
Hello, Chair Redmond. Yes, I would like to declare, of course, at the beginning of the meeting and then, of course, at the item of reference, I have a direct conflict of interest with regard to property value that is falling within the housekeeping amendment of the regional official plan. Report Peter, David, Larry, Carl, Peter, Larry, 21-33. And I will declare again as the item is raised. Thank you, Chair Redmond.
Thank you, Councillor Jowett. Councillor Harris.
Yes, I apologize. I'm going to try to keep my connection good here, but I would like to declare a conflict of interest with regards to the new affordable housing item. Report number CSD HOU 21-12. Item number 12. Due to my employment with Vandal Construction and indirect conflict of interest.
So I want to thank you, colleagues. I'm going to give you the opportunity to declare these conflicts when we are in council. This is Committee of the Whole, and it's specifically around the presentation for the business plan and budget. So, right. Councillor Shantz, I saw your hand go up and down, and we will provide you that opportunity at the beginning of the council meeting. So thank you for all being so conscientious and much appreciated.
Okay.
We're going to have to turn to a presentation, budget 2022 budget context guidelines and timelines. And I'm going to turn the floor over to Craig Dyer, and I believe he's going to share his screen and walk us through this portion. Welcome, Mr. Dyer.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair. And before I share my slide deck, just a quick overview of the purpose of today's discussion. I do have a very short presentation just to provide a little context, but want to leave as much time for discussion and input from council as possible. This is really a follow-up to the conversation that was started back on June the 15th when we got together to talk about the 2022 plan budget. And you'll recall that we staff provided information with respect to what world-class means to us at the region of Waterloo. We talked about the focus and emphasis on our strategic plan guiding all of our actions. We went through fairly briefly some of the successes from the 2021 budget process, and then really got right into the context of what 2022 was shaping up to look like. And we talked about some of the pressures on our budget, which I'll remind you of today, and some of the challenges with respect to our capital plan. And then we ended off with a little bit about principles, about the timeline and guidelines for staff as we prepare the budget. And that's really what the focus is today on, those three items. We're really looking for some input from council on the principles that we've put together, on the timeline we've put together, and to get some indication from council as to what property tax and user rate guidelines might look like for 2022. That would of course help us immensely as we go through our budget development process over the course of the summer. And with that, I'm just going to share my screen. And just give me a minute to start the slideshow here. And I hope everybody can see that well. Okay, excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Chair Redmond. So most of this is a recap of what we talked about. And I'm going to start and end with this slide because it's really at the, a fundamental part of the reason why we're here today. The reminder at the top that, again, the strategic plan guides everything that we do. We have objectives, we have actions, we have desired outcomes that we're all working towards. And then the annual budget becomes a tool to ensure that the plan is appropriately funded. So some of the principles that we've put together, we thought that the 21 budget process was very successful and we wanted to build on that approach. There's a number of critical elements in this organization that we know we need to invest in, and in some cases we want to continue investing in. And that includes items such as the well-being of our employees, a focus, a recent but growing focus on innovation, on automation, on how we can use technology to further deliver the region's services and to deliver those services more effectively and efficiently. As we go through our budget preparation, we're going to be looking where possible to consolidate support services across the organization. We began that conversation in last year's budget, and I still think we have some opportunity to pursue that. Similarly with 2021 budget, avoiding service reductions at all costs, but acknowledging that there may be some very appropriate changes to service to meet changes in demand. As always, we're mindful of how our tax rates and user rates and charges affect the business community and the residents, the 630,000 residents in the region. And that's, in part why we're looking for a guideline. Last year, you'll recall, council provided a guideline for the 2021 budget. I think overall, we found that extremely helpful in our process, in our budget process. We started talking about capital a couple of weeks ago, and we want to make sure that we continue to build appropriate levels of funding for our capital infrastructure in order to keep us on a path towards long-term financial sustainability. And as in every year, we need to make sure we're not just looking at the upcoming year, but looking at the 2, 3, 4, 5 years that follow to make sure that the what we're recommending and what council is approving in 2022 doesn't create issues on problems for the 2023 and future budgets. From a capital perspective, again, this is unchanged from a couple of weeks ago. We've put these principles together internally to guide our work. And it's really about looking for opportunities to adjust the timing, the scale, the scope in some cases of projects in order to minimize the need for growth-related debt, to make sure that we're issuing debt where it's appropriate for the right projects. And as you see on the bottom point here, we're trying to minimize the use of debt for asset renewal. We want to preserve our debt capacity for the larger, more transformational projects needed in the region. From a timeline perspective, we're proposing a schedule that would lead us to December budget approval, consistent with what we've done over the last few years, with an exception from this past year where it was later in January before we got the budget approved. We would have budget committee meetings starting in October, detailed reviews in November, and then approval in December. This is probably the one slide of new information from the last time, and kind of we put this together really in response to some of the questions that were asked. And so this is just a more detailed view of some of the pressures and priorities. So you can see, for example, on the left-hand side, we have a plan to reinstate and increase transit service levels. That will start in September of this year and continue, subject to council approval, will continue in the fall of next year. Paramedic services master plan, something that council has been implementing over the last several years, and that is expected to continue next year, as is year 2 of the strategic investments approved as part of the 2021 budget. We're also building a draft budget that would include the proposed affordable housing levy that was approved in principle by council back in January of this year, and then continuing funding for the RDC exemptions, our debt servicing and asset renewal, as well as tax increment grants that have already been approved by council. I should note, I'm not sure whether I said this 2 weeks ago, the numbers that we've been talking about at this point exclude the police services, and that will continue today. So when we had suggested a 6% increase for tax-supported regional services, that excludes the police. And keep in mind that these services represent about 2/3 of the total tax bill. So if you're thinking total tax bill, then a 6% increase on the non-police items would mean about a 4% increase on the overall tax bill. User rate budget models running between 2 and 3% right now. Again, we'll be looking for some guidance on this, as well as the budget principles and the timeline. So just a very quick recap on the guideline. We believed in 2021 that this was immensely helpful for us. And we think even more so this year. We have a lot of budget and planning work to do over the summer, and getting some early indication, formal or informal, from council as to what you'll be looking for in terms of property tax and user rate impacts would be extremely helpful. And just a reminder that 1% overall on regional tax on the regional budget is about just under $6 million, 5.9 million. And that represents $21 for a typical residence. And then I'm back to where we started with our principles that we've put together to guide our actions as we put the budget together over the summer. Those are my comments, Madam Chair, and I'm happy to turn it back to you for discussion and input from council.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dyer. Questions from council? Councillor Erb, please go ahead.
Thank you. I think it was on the second slide, Mr. Dyer, on the proposed tax levy, you had plus 2.9 million. is that 2.9 million referring to the potential 0.5%, or did you find another 2.9 million that you're just putting in there for goodwill?
It's a very good question, Councillor Erb, and through you, Madam Chair. No, that is the 0.5% that was approved in principle back on budget day in January.
Okay, so it's not a plus.
It's a plus in the sense that it's an incremental impact to the budget.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, Councillor Erb?
No, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Galloway, please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Craig, in your slide where you listed all the inclusions, including restoring transit levels to 97 whatever odd percent of 2020 levels. I know I asked this question at the first meeting. Is the enhancements that were pre-approved for 2020, which were subsequently delayed for 2021, are they included in the preliminary estimates?
So through you, Madam Chair, I think the short answer to that question is yes. We have 48,000 service hours that will be added back into the system in September of this year. I think subject to final council approval later today. And if I understand it right, it included in our initial numbers for the 2022 budget would be an additional approximately 50,000 hours, service hours that would be added, that would be proposed to be added added in September of 2022. And that would either to a great extent or if not completely add back the service hours that were contemplated in those 2020 service expansions that were approved but never implemented.
Councillor Galloway?
Okay, so I think we're talking apples and apples. So last year, when we had to kind of reboot our budget with the pandemic, and we made decisions to not proceed with certain pre-approved routes. This is not anything to do with existing service levels. We agreed to postpone those additional new routes, essentially some I-Express routes. And so they are incorporated in the estimates.
Yes, they are. And you'll recall, Councillor Galloway, so they were approved in 2020 but not implemented. They then came out of the 2021 budget. We're adding some of those hours back in September of this year, and then another 50,000 proposed to be added back in 2022.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Strickland.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks for the presentation, Craig. You know, in terms of your request to have a discussion around a targeted potential tax rate increase, I'll just maybe start that discussion off and say that 6% increase plus whatever we get from police is, in my mind, a non-starter. That's unacceptable. We're still coming out of COVID. Many people are still hurting, businesses are hurting, and so on. So I recognize that we supported as much as we could the 0% tax increase for 2021 budget, which I think was very well received by the public. I think it was the right call, given the circumstances. I don't think, just like that was the right call to keep it at 0%, I don't think the right call is to get in a tax increase over 7% this time around, including police. So, and I'd also like to, focus on increased spending. So, 1% tax increase equals $6 million. So if we raise taxes by 2%, That's an additional $12 million in spending, plus assessment growth, say at 1.5%. That's $9 million. So if we delivered a tax rate increase for regional programs at 2%, plus their assessment growth, we're looking at an additional $20 million in new spending. So I think that's reasonable given the economic circumstances that our community is experiencing. I don't deny that it'll be a challenge for us to do that, but I would suggest, and Madam Chair, I don't know how you want to stick handle this, but I would suggest that we target a tax increase at a maximum of 2% for all regional programs for the 2022 budget. I'll make that a motion if that helps.
Thank you, Councillor Strickland. So you're suggesting that we ask staff to come back targeting what a 2% increase in the regional budget would look like as far as how they would construct that, right? Is Sean frozen? Okay, Sean will come back. Sean, are you unfrozen?
We did it last time. Like if we put a tax increase out there, then staff come back with implications and we're going back and forth. If we set a firm target, I think for our benefit and for staff's benefit, it'd be much better received. So you know exactly what everyone is working to achieve.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Strickland has put a motion on the floor that we ask staff to come back with a budget that is predicated on a 2% increase. Do I have a seconder for that? Okay, seconded by Councillor Jowett. Councillor Pravanovich.
Thanks, and I have some questions for Mr. Dyer, and then we'll comment on the motion. Mr. Dyer, in order to get to the 0% that you spoke of last year, you ended up needing to use regional reserves to get there, correct?
Madam Chair, to a very small extent. There was a small amount of tax stabilization reserve funding that was needed, and we tried to focus that tax stabilization reserve funding on programs that had a shorter time frame, if you will, rather than items that we knew would be with us permanently. So, for example, we funded the strategic investment in business supports largely through the TSR because it had an 18-month or so time period associated with it. So yes, I would say to a small extent, we did use reserves in 2021.
So to what percentage would those reserves have represented?
I would suggest probably in the range of 0.5%.
Okay.
Keeping in mind also that in some cases we've used the TSR quite effectively as we phase in funding through the paramedic services master plan. We know that the provincial subsidy has a 1-year lag. We use the TSR to buffer the impact in the first year of paramedic services improvements.
Okay, and Mr. Dyer, just in terms of inflation, where are we looking at in terms of inflation right now?
Yes, a very good question, Councillor. So current inflation rates year over year are running in the 3.5% range. And that's largely a function of how low inflation was a year ago. So I'm not expecting that we're going to see that kind of average over the course of this year. I think most of the projections from banks and from governments are in the low 2% range as an overall inflation rate for 2021 and into 2022. Now that's going to vary by component. Certainly we've seen much more significant price escalation on fuel, for example, and that's a big part also of what's driving the current rates.
Councillor Pravanovich, do you have another question?
Yes, I do. So in terms, I mean, my concern, and I had this concern last year, is that we're moving ourselves towards structural deficits that are going to be difficult for us to deal with in the long run. And while, you know, they maybe were necessary or even look good, it's not, you know, consistent for the long-term fiscal health of the region. If in fact inflation is running higher than 2%, if in fact we have used, you know, 0.5% out of reserves, that's 0.5% that we need to find right now for next year's budget. If you've come in at 6% without policing, how realistic is 2%? As much as I'd like it to be that, I'm just very concerned about the proposal that's on the floor as a starting point.
Well, through you, Madam Chair, there's no question that it's going to be a challenge. You know, we've been working on the 2022 budget for a few months now. We started the process shortly after the 21 budget was approved. We'll be doing our detailed work over the month of July and taking a first look at numbers as we get into August. So, you know, my sense right now is that, yes, it's challenging. I could probably say that for almost every budget year. You know, we're certainly prepared to turn our minds to whatever direction that we get from council and bring back a budget that's consistent with that direction.
Thank you. Mr. Lochner is going to weigh in on this too.
Thank you.
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair. Agree with what Mr. Dyer has said. I mean, looking back, and I've been here for a year now, and hearing the commissioners and teams speak, this has been lots of pressure for lots of years and lots of reductions. My observation would be we're now at the point where 4% is much harder than it was last year and the year before and the year before. We are doing some things, and this is why the principles are so important as a package. We could achieve this with less difficulty. I would never say it's easy, with less difficulty, provided that all the principles are supported. We are doing things like automating to free up staff time, but again, that requires an investment. And as we modernize, like any organization that modernizes, it's hard to reduce while you require investments in other areas. So I would say that whatever number, notional target we're given, it's imperative that that comes along with the package, which means prioritizing the most important things, which means things that have been sacred for years are no longer sacred, and which will put immense pressure not only on staff, but on council to make some decisions that potentially would not have had to be brought forward in previous years. So I view it as a package, and that's why we put it together as a package in principles. We can't segment the two and sit here and say, yeah, we can do it all unless we get all of those principles as well.
So, Madam Chair, in listening to all of this conversation and concern with where we, quite frankly, with where we ended up last year, and its long-term impact, I may actually put an amendment forward. I want to hear what our colleagues have to say, but I may put an amendment forward that the target number we in fact use is inflation. And not 2%. I think that that difference, potentially will save some vital services that are important to the residents of our community, and speak to the kind of world-class region that we're hearing articulated, and so I think we need to be, consistent in those approaches while also being fiscally prudent going forward. The other piece that I do want to raise, because I think I've always struggled with this since my time at the region. I know why they were separated, but philosophically, I actually think it's wrong for the police budget to be separated from everything else. Fundamentally, it's a service provided by the region. Yes, there is a model that allows us to farm it out if that's what we want to do, but then we would have to pay for it anyway. There's a model of governance that's not unlike, for example, library boards, where council approves a library board's budget, or in City of Kitchener's case, things like the auditorium. It's obviously a little different from a governance point of view. But at the end of the day, it's a service that we provide. And I actually think we really should start looking at these things in the context of one unified budget for all services provided by the region. And so I'd really like to hear the rationale further for that. And is that in fact the consistent practice amongst other regions and similar types of communities in the province?
So, Councillor Bravanovich, I'm actually hearing you propose two things. One is that you'd like to hear rationale as to how what the model would look like if police services was part of the budget. And you're also saying that you would like to propose an amendment rather than the 2% motion that's on the table. And you said inflation. And what are you pegging inflation at? What exactly does that motion look like, or that amendment?
Well, staff is the one who pegs inflation based on the numbers. So they would have to tell us what that number is.
Okay. Mr. Dyer, can you respond to either or both of those?
I can certainly give it a try, Madam Chair. With respect to inflation, yes, we regularly and on an ongoing basis monitor inflation projections. It would be not difficult at all at any point in the process to bring forward to council what the most recent inflation projections are at any point in the process. So we don't predict inflation ourselves, but we do look to the expert economists who do this kind of work, and we can certainly bring back at any given time what the current estimates are for inflation. With respect to the police, I would say a couple of things. One, the way the budgets have been presented in the past have been, I think, reflective of the decision-making and governance model associated with those budgets. At this point, in terms of the numbers we've provided today, I think the reason for the separation, if I can use your term, Councillor Verbanovic, we haven't yet had an opportunity to sit down with the police and talk about what 2022 budgets will look like. We'll certainly be doing that over the summer, and we know they started those discussions in earnest. And the other comment I would make is, I would say that the way that we present the budget as a budget for regional services and a budget for police services is likely very consistent with how this is done across the province.
Okay, so Councillor Bravanovich, I guess my question would be is, as we look at crafting this budget, there has to be a point in time when staff identifies what that inflation rate looks like so that they know what the target is. So as part of your proposal, is this something you would like brought back, or would you like to identify what point in time that rate would be fixed, because that's how the budget is being built?
So I know that the CFOs, municipalities in the region, use a similar figure for inflation for all of our municipalities. So I think that would be the guidance in terms of when that would be. I know in Kitchener's case specifically, for our budget, we actually use an average of the last 2 years, which allows for any particular blips. And so that's where I would look for consistency in the approach from and guidance from Mr. Dyer on that.
Okay, so are you putting forward an amendment right now, or do you want me to go to?
Well, I said I want to hear from our other colleagues and see what their thoughts are on this.
Okay, so and we have a few. Councillor Shantz.
Thank you. A couple of questions, and they may be rhetorical. One is, I'm assuming, Sean, that your motion is 2% overall for the whole budget excluding police services. So I guess my comment, one of my comments is similar to what Mr. Lochner said. What are we going to take out? What is not important that we're doing now? Because we've identified in the last year or two some very important strategic housing initiatives, for example, that are going to cost additional funds. We want to put in some additional Indigenous, Black, and racialized community initiatives. So if we go with 2%, assuming that's inflation, we didn't have any increase last year. So we've got an operating budget, and how do we keep that going if we're also going to add in all of these other initiatives? I know one of the things we've done in the township is for infrastructure, we put a specific part of the levy that was specific to that initiative, and we found that's worked well for us. It separates out sort of our operating part from our special projects part, and I don't know if that's something that we could consider separating the two. I don't think 2% is going to meet all of the priorities that we've identified in the last year or two. I'm not sure what the right number is. I just think inflation isn't going to meet what we've set out as our objectives.
And Councillor Shantz, I'm assuming from your comments you feel inflation is higher than 2% anyway?
I think it's in the range of 2. I'm not,
okay.
But I'm not sure, so correct me.
I think it's a floating target. I know when I was at Habitat that we went September to September. It was a bit arbitrary, but that's sort of what we fixated on, you know, that was our threshold. And I don't know, Mr. Dyer, do you want to comment, or we'll just assume that was a bit rhetorical?
I think I'd prefer to go the rhetorical route on that. That being said, just, you know, maybe to offer something helpful on the inflation side, you know, staff could certainly report back in the fall, which is something that we do typically anyway, say October or November, with the most recent projections for inflation in 2022. I think it's a bit challenging for us to look at historical inflation, especially you know, in the very uncertain time we're in right now. But we could certainly bring back a selection, a sample of inflation projections from major banks and governments in the fall, and that could serve as guidance at that point.
Thank you for that. Councillor Jaworski.
Thank you, through the chair. And I will have a question, but I would like to give some comments. I think Councillor Strickland is wise in that we have staff working on something that council is going to support rather than not going to support at the end and have a summer wasted. But I would suggest that the federal government and the provincial government, they're investing towards the new normal to get us out of this pandemic. And it truly is unfortunate that we have a regressive taxation that is our only option. And those in themselves are competing priorities. I think we see a competing priority just in our council package today of the strategic initiatives, which I think we would all look at and say, yes, that's the new normal. That's what we need to focus on in 2022. Plus the reserves, which are always hidden. And just the competing priorities there with respect to what our tax increase is. So, you know, I think if anything, I'm landing with Sandy on the fact that, you know, strategic priorities are important. But, you know, I think as Councillor Strickland has said, whatever 6% or whatever is a non-starter. But my question is really on assessment growth, Craig. What sort of range are we predicting on that, and how does that factor into this exactly? Can you refresh my memory?
Certainly, through you, Madam Chair. The work that we've done so far on assessment growth is pointing us to a figure of approximately 1.3%. So that's similar to the percentage increase that we experienced in 2020 for the 2021 budget. And that number is based on two things. One is the estimates that we received from MPAC of the amount of new growth that they intend to add to the roll. And then from that, we back off an estimate based on historical experience of reductions to the roll from requests for reconsideration, assessment review board appeals, and things like that. So that's our current estimate right now. It fell somewhere between 1.1 and 1.4, and we chose 1.3 as our early estimate for assessment growth.
Thank you very much, Craig. And I would suggest to Mr. Lochner that at the end of our council weighing in, where council has said certainly 6% is on the too high end, at some point we're going to have to hear from staff, Mr. Lochner, whether what we're discussing is at the way too low end, or something in between. But I think we'll get there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, and Mr. Lochner is happy to jump in.
Thanks. I'll also comment once we've heard from all of council, through you, Madam Chair, to Mayor Jaworski's point. I think the comment was well placed that, yes, strategic priorities are important, but we have to remember, I know council knows this is more for the public, that the region is essentially an organization of essential services. So everything is strategic and everything is pretty essential for the most part. So as we talked the other day, no one wants potholes in their roads. Everybody wants to turn on the tap in the morning and make sure we have safe water. Everybody wants to make sure we have the buses running. So the challenge, I just want to emphasize that the challenge in an organization like a hospital, like a region, like any other organization that is predominantly essential services is different than in organizations where you might have different choices. And again, I'm not saying it's harder or easier. I'm just saying it's different being an essential service organization.
Thank you. Councillor Erb, please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a couple of questions. First of all, I'm wondering what time of the year in 2020 we gave direction to staff for a 0% tax levy. Was it around this time as well, or was it later in the year?
Mr. Dyer, it was a sunny day at the airport, wasn't it?
It was a beautiful day at the airport in the middle of September.
In the middle of September. Okay, thank you. Another question I would have, I'm curious, in this preliminary budget where we're showing an increase of 6%, would there be any things that are included in this 6% that are there because we were at 0% last year? Are we beginning to already play catch up because of a 0% increase the previous year?
Mr. Dyer?
Yeah, excellent question, Councillor Erb. I would say that there is very little included in the 6% that relates to the 0% that was approved in 2021. I think we were very cautious, maybe there's a better word for it, but we were cautious about making sure that changes we made to the 2021 budget were not going to come back and bite us in 2022. I think there's actually not very much that falls into that category. I think what we're seeing in 2022 is similar to what we've seen in previous budget years. We have a variety of master plans that we want to and need to keep implementing. We have inflationary adjustments, maybe a little bit higher than we might have anticipated a year ago, but certainly inflation is going to factor into the 2022 budget. We have the continuation of funding strategies for development charge exemptions and for capital financing, which has largely been the story of previous budgets as well. So the short answer to your question is very little.
Okay, thank you. I fully agree with Councillor Strickland and some of my other colleagues who have said that 6% is not acceptable, I don't think, to any of them. But I'm also not convinced that given the strategic priorities that council has committed to, that 2% is adequate. And given that we did not make the 0% decision until September, I'm wondering if we're a little bit early in the process and we can look at more of a range at this point before we give a definitive number. And you know, I don't want to make it difficult for staff because they don't know what they're working on, but it feels to me that it's just a bit early if we did the 0% in September last year. Thank you.
So, Mr. Dyer, can you comment on the timing and whether a range or a couple of thresholds would create excessive work for staff?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I can comment on both. First of all, in terms of the timing, we're a little bit earlier than we were last year. I think that's partly because we're looking to have a budget process that concludes in December of this year, rather than in the first couple of months of next year. So for the 2021 budget, we received guidance in September for a budget that was approved in the following January. This year, we're looking for guidance at the end of June for a budget that would be approved in December. So I don't think the timing is too far off. That being said, we can absolutely work within, let's say, a reasonably narrow range. I don't think any of us expected today that we would get, absolute certainty on this issue. We get that there's a lot of change happening, and a lot could happen between now and December. If we had a reasonable range to work with, that would be helpful for us.
Councillor Erb, any further questions or comments?
No, that's helpful for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Jowett, please go ahead.
Thanks, Chair Redmond. And I appreciate Sean's prudence, and the 6%'s a little high for me, but I also am very concerned about structural deficit post-COVID recovery, because I know that the community is going to need our leadership in lots of cases. So I think we need to keep that in mind. One of the suggestions I had is perhaps a report demonstrating the funds that the province and the feds have provided to us over COVID to ensure that we, and the terms and conditions associated with it, to ensure that we're maximizing our potential use of said funds. And I am interested in Councillor Urbanovic's suggestion of aggregate budgeting for policing. Perhaps it would be easier to work together with them on an outcome that might encourage accountability there. I'm not really sure what that looks like, but I am curious about that. If it's something that could bring us more information to the table. The other thing is, and just final point, Madam Chair, is the assessment growth with which it refers to, or Mr. Dyer refers to, through impact. We know that there's growth and then there's a sort of reductions every year in that number, and we're speaking to the number of ratepayers, but are we quantifying housing values with regard to the ridiculous amount with which housing is increasing in property values? Is that number being taken into your projections, Mr. Dyer, at all? So those are kind of my thoughts and questions.
Mr. Dyer?
Yep. So through you, Madam Chair, Councillor Jowett, with respect to your comment about a report on federal and provincial funding, we're actually working on that right now. Our intention is to bring forward a mid-year financial and plan update to council, which we're targeting for the August committee cycle. And so part of that will include, here's a summary of the funding that we've received from the province so far this year, and here's how we intend to use it. Your second question with respect to rapidly increasing housing values, and does that get taken into account in our assessment growth? And the answer is definitively no. And the reason for that is, I think of the best way to describe this, the province of Ontario is on, from a property assessment perspective, the entire province is on a January 1st, 2016 current value assessment model. And you'll recall that the schedule was for us to have an assessment update to 2019 values this year. That assessment update was delayed by the province. They've delayed it a further year past 2022. So at least for this fiscal year and next fiscal year, the entire province will remain on a January 1st, 2016 market value from a property assessment perspective. So it's not an issue about changing values. The issue is really the amount of net growth that's in the system. But everything gets put onto a January 1st, 2016 value, even buildings that are built and occupied today.
And so, Craig, just one final point of clarity for myself. Are you telling me that, because of the delay itself, we won't receive those funds, or that we will receive the actual impact property tax funds appropriated to us? They're just using older dates for projections because they have not done the tallying. Like I'm just trying to get that gap. Like what are they projecting versus what are we actually taking into our impact assessment growth specifically? What they are. I'm so sorry. I wish I could articulate this a little bit stronger, but when you tell me that it's been delayed to 2022, well, clearly there's been a significant increase in housing values in each of those years. So what comes into our bank, I guess? Yep. And does that make more sense?
It does make a bit more sense. And through you, Madam Chair, I just want to reassure council that the delay in the assessment update doesn't cost us. Like we're not, it's not an issue of the region or municipalities not getting the revenue that they deserve. What we get from impact is their estimate of the value of the assessed value of property that they're going to add over the course of this year. And we use that estimate to work out our modeling of assessment growth. When they eventually get around to doing a reassessment to a more up-to-date value, all of the values get moved up and adjusted. And that doesn't actually lead to any additional municipal revenue because we have to then go back and calculate a revenue neutral tax rate. So don't think of this in terms of because the reassessment's been delayed that the municipality is going to be out money. That's actually not the case at all.
Does that help, Councillor Jowett?
Yeah, thanks so much. I don't want to belabor a point that has little significance, so I do appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Foxton, please go ahead.
There we go. Got it. Okay. Thank you. And through the chair, so many topics. First off, I think we agree 6% is too much of a burden for the taxpayer. But we also realize that the wants of the region, the desires, and the necessities to supply the actions for the regions do cost. So, but we always start off with a high figure. And then we whittle it down and whittle it down. Trying to roll the taxes for the police in with our budget doesn't make sense. We don't have that right. We have no right to say what the budget for policing will be. To roll it into all one assumes that council had a right and had a choice. And council really doesn't. We don't get to debate the figure. Although I do believe they do the very best they can to get the best cost and buck for the taxpayer. But we don't have that right. So I think seeing it as a separate number is still essential. If we roll it into us, then we have to explain the costs on a discussion that we weren't involved in. So this is, I think we're in the normal process of saying, okay, and Craig, you can say 6%, Sean can say 2%, but in the reality of this said, come budget day, we will go through all the situations and come with what we believe will impact us, and will be the set number. Another thing is COVID, and we hired so many extra staff. Will those staff still be on at the time of budget? Will they still have an impact on our budget, or will they no longer be required? There's been huge hiring in the region. I'd like to see the numbers of full-time employees we had before and the number of full-time employees we have now, and how that's influenced. And I see Craig Dyer nodding his head. It's had a huge impact on the cost. Huge. Does that differentiate? And again, that's a moving target. We don't know where COVID's going. So many things to think about, and I'm glad we're having the discussion. We can say 6%, Craig, and we can say 2%, Sean, but the reality is once we get down into the nitty-gritty and come up with the real number, we understand 6% is high, we understand 2% is low, but that's what we're here to discuss and come up with the real numbers based on what we want our region to look like.
Thank you, Councillor Fox. And I'm going to look at Mr. Dyer just for 2 qualifications. One is, Craig, can you talk about the extra staff during COVID? My understanding is a lot of those have to do with the vaccine rollout, and that will be a bill that we send to the federal government. So I'd like that confirmed. And you also mentioned earlier, and I have 3 more speakers, about a narrow band. So can you define narrow as well?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. So the answer to the first question, I'd say, Madam Chair, you're absolutely correct. We have brought on many new staff to deal with vaccine distribution rollout. Our hope and expectation is that those costs will be 100% covered by the Ministry of Health. So that's a process we'll be working through with the ministry. And I would say that I wouldn't expect that to be a factor in any tax rate increase for 2022. In terms of a narrow range, I was afraid you were going to ask that. Let me try it this way. If our modeling right now is telling us 6% based on a whole bunch of estimates and assumptions that we've made. And we're going to go through a budget development process over the summer. If you told us that between 3 and 4%, for example, was acceptable, that would head us down a certain path of how we get to a 3 or 4% range. If you told us that 0 to 1% was what you had in mind, that's a very, very different process for us. And so what we're looking for, I think today is order of magnitude. So let's say a range within 1% or 1.5% would probably give us enough to work with. But we want to make sure that, I can't remember, one of the councillors made the comment earlier about we don't want to have a wasted summer. It would be unfortunate if we thought that 4%, for example, was going to be acceptable and we spent the summer working on that. And then we determine at a later date that no, it had to be 0. The more guidance you can give us now in the narrowest possible range is helpful for us.
Thank you very much. I'm going to go to Councillor Galloway because he hasn't spoken. Then I'll go back to Councillor Strickland and Verbanovich, and then I think we're going to have to wrap this up and go on to council. So, Councillor Galloway.
Sure. On the matter of the target, I'm fine with either the 2% or the rate of inflation. I don't think they're going to be too far apart in any event. So I guess we're going to ask staff to come back with that, the rate of inflation and different ways of calculating that. And of course, we need to keep in mind that whether it's 2% or it's 1.95 or 2.05, the assessment increases on top of that in terms of additional spending, as Councillor Strickland had pointed out. On the matter of the police budget, we've debated this before, and I think I'm come around to the position that Councillor Ivanovic is putting forward in terms of rolling the police back into the budget. And the reason I'm thinking of that in that way now is I believe it'll provide for a little more transparency and a little more relationship to the overall budget. The way we've been doing it for the last number of years, it's like there's no relationship between the number that the regional programs are predicted or targeted, and the police kind of have almost free reign. If we roll them into the target, then really we're saying to them, if the regional programs are 2%, then you're 2% as well. There may be some people who would like them to be a lot less than 2%, but I'm just saying on the surface, that then becomes their target as well by extension, and that wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing. So, and it also has the appearance, because I know there's a lot of concern amongst regional staff, certainly it's been expressed over the years, that the police kind of get what they need, and then the region gets what's ever left over. Regional programs get what's left over because members of council, us, have a magic number in our head, and then do the quick math. The police get much of what they want. There is some independence in that particular calculation, as Councillor Foxton has indicated. And then regional programs get the rest. I think if we roll it all together, there'll be less appearance of that, and maybe in actual outcomes, there'll be less of what we've had in the past. So I would be okay with doing it that way. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Galloway. Councillor Strickland and then Councillor Brvanovic. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I really appreciate the discussion. I'd just like to make a comment on this inflation question, and Councillor Galloway put it nicely as well, is that if, for example, we increase taxes by 2% on regional programs, not including police, and assessment growth comes in around 1.5%, which is projected, that's a total increase of 3.5%, which will likely be greater than the annualized rate of inflation. So we got to look at more than just what our tax increase is. We got to look at what our total overall increase in spending is if we're going to compare it to inflation, in fairness. So, Madam, I'm just, I put the motion on the floor, and it's been good discussion. Some people are comfortable at 2%, some aren't. There's lots more questions. Staff would like a higher range, obviously. So I'm just wondering if, I would defer the motion is what I would suggest is one way out of this, rather than going back and forth and horse trading on percentages today, and maybe defer the motion and, further Councillor Erb's comments, ask staff to go back and maybe look at what a budget would look like at a range from 2 to 3%. And if we need to delay the budget process, like ideally we want to get it done by December. But if we need to buy more time because of the uncertainty connected to COVID and assessment growth and economic recovery, and set the budget in January, we can also do that. So there's no legislative requirement that we need to have the budget done by the end of December. So if we need a little bit more time to make a decision, send staff away to have more look at, what it would look like for a tax increase between 2 and 3%, and then we could come back and make a decision from there and defer my motion. That just might be a way forward for us, Madam Chair, that I would suggest, rather getting into any kind of back and forth on a definitive kind of increase today.
So, Councillor Strickland, just a suggestion, and certainly it's your motion, and I'd like to Councillor Jowett if she finds it a friendly amendment. What about just changing your motion rather than being definitive 2%, say in the range of 2 to 3%? and see what staff would bring back. Are you amenable to that, or do you want to just defer any kind of line in the sand? I think staff is really looking for a little bit of direction, so I'll propose that. If you don't like that, we can defer it.
I'm kind of reluctant to do that. But, at the end of the day, we still make a decision what the increase is going to be. So if Councillor Jowett's supportive of that and the rest of council is, can I get an indication from my colleagues if they would support that before I agree to change my mind?
Okay, maybe we should go to Councillor Vrvanovich, because Councillor Vrvanovich said that he might propose an amendment. Does this incorporate enough of what you're looking for, Councillor Vrvanovich, or do you not see this as a
Madam Chair, sorry, just before I relinquish the floor, if it's amenable to Councillor Jowett, I would amend it for 2 to 3% range to come back at the appropriate time.
Okay, Councillor Jowett.
I'm amendable to that for sure.
Okay, so not deferring the motion, but saying bring it back in a range between 2 and 3%, right, Councillor Strickland?
Yeah.
Okay, Councillor Vrvanovich.
Thanks, Chair Redmond, and I'm certainly preferring the direction that I'm hearing now. To be clear, I would not have supported a deferral because I think, as you indicated, Madam Chair, staff are looking for some direction, and I think to leave things in abeyance would not have been fair. I know Mr. Dyer has indicated that he's going to bring a report back in August in terms of how we're doing. I anxiously await that report because I do have some worries on that front, and I'll just leave it at that for the time being. I still think that, at least from my perspective, the target that I'm going to be looking for, and again, this is a target, is inflation. We're using a running Ontario CPI, which last year was 0.64%, but so far this year is 2.32%, and going up because of the last couple of months have been over 3% in terms of inflation. So I suspect that we'll end up somewhere between 2.5 and 3. And I think that broad direction that Councillor Strickland has changed his motion to is consistent with that. But I do think that at some point, this is a broader discussion that we should be having to provide guidance for staff in the future. At the end of the day, nothing we say now is going to ultimately determine where the budget lands. The budget that lands is going to be the budget that's approved on budget day. And this council will make those decisions based on the information presented before it and the priorities that we've identified that balance affordability and the kind of community we're looking to have. Because we do know, for example, that there will be significant pressures on us, particularly in the areas of things like our shelter system, supportive housing, and so on, that coming out of the pandemic, we are not going to be able to go back to where things were in the past. That's not acceptable from a moral point of view, and it's not acceptable in the eyes of our community any longer.
Thank you. Councillor Erb.
Thank you, and I really appreciate the gesture of Councillor Strickland to move this to some kind of a compromise. I'm curious. I really like the idea of somehow tying the police budget into what we're recommending as well, and so I'm wondering how that conversation can take place. Or do we? Where does that direction come from? To me, that just makes so much sense.
So last year, Councillor Erb, the police did look at a rate of tax or increase in their budget that was similar to what the region was looking at. But I will look to Mr. Lochner to comment.
Sure, through you, Madam Chair. A process we would likely follow would be to talk to the chair of both organizations, which just happens to be Chair Redmond, And I would engage Chief Larkin on what that discussion might look like. And then, of course, Mr. Dyer and the head of finance from the police service would be engaged as well. So I think a conversation is the first step to shape what that might look like and go from there.
Councillor Erb?
I would support that. You know, in the past, in the three budgets that I've been part of, the amount comes to council on budget day. We say we have no jurisdiction over the operational part of it, but we would have a bit of a say if we 5 or 6 months earlier had the opportunity to give some kind of a guideline to live within the same means that the region lives within. So I would support that conversation.
Thank you, Councillor Erb. I see no further speakers, so we have a motion that we would direct staff to come back with a budget between 2% and 3%. Is it August or September, I think? So I would ask you to use your icons and please vote. Councillor Vanovich, are you voting with your hand again? That is carried. Is there any other business? Next meeting is to be determined, and I will now entertain a motion to adjourn. That is moved by Councillor McGarry, seconded by Councillor Foxton. Please use your icons to vote yes and no. It's always the most popular motion in the meeting, isn't it? That is carried. Colleagues, I would suggest that we can have a 10-minute break and we will convene in council. Thank you.